Some students have a fixed mindset. They believe that their basic intelligence is just a fixed trait. You have a certain amount and that's that. It makes them very concerned with how much they have. Before they do a task, they think, am I going to look smart? Am I not going to look smart? And they base their activities on whether their intelligence will be shown to advantage. Other students think, that's wrong. My intelligence is something that I can develop my whole life through passion and studying and education. So then we decided, what if we taught students the growth mindset? We developed an 8-session workshop. Half of the students in the study got this 8-session workshop of study skills and a growth mindset. The other half got all study skills. The study skills were great. We thought they were motivating. They did no good whatsoever. Wow. To the students, because they didn't have the motivation to put them into practice. For those students, their grades continued to decline. But for the students who got the growth mindset lesson, which is your brain is like a muscle, it gets stronger with use. They learned that every time they learned something new, their brain formed new connections over time. They could increase their intellectual skills. They were told, nobody laughs at babies and says how dumb they are. They just haven't learned yet. Well, they read an article about this, and there was lots of discussion, heated, animated discussion, and they were taught how to apply this to their schoolwork. At the end of the semester, they showed a significant rebound in their grades, and the teachers could pick out which students were in the growth mindset.
Even though they didn't know.
They didn't know there were even 2 workshops. Ross Bentley, kind of a world-renowned racing car coach, read my book and contacted me. He saw the connection between a growth mindset and optimal performance. These top races many of them last for hours. And in the course of the event, mistakes are inevitable. The difference between a winning driver and a losing driver is what you do with those mistakes. Over the course of our conversations, we developed some collaborative work to see whether, in fact, racing drivers who have a growth mindset are able to enter the zone and stay in the zone even after they've made mistakes. It's so important in the business world for people at all levels to believe in growth, the growth of skills, to be able to admit mistakes and overcome them. You can't keep up with this changing world if you can't grow and can't learn. So that's one very important application. But the other is, you can't be a mentor, a good mentor, without having a growth mindset. And so it tells you how one group is really going around the world curious to learn, and the other is going around the world wanting to feel smart.
Charles Darwin had a half-cousin named Francis Galton, and they shared a correspondence. I like to think that correspondence today, is as rich and personally revealing as it was when you had to put a pen to paper. So maybe if they had emailed, they would have shared the same kinds of conversations. This conversation, this quote, this is actually the letter on the left, and maybe a little more legible on the right, was Charles Darwin's response to Francis Galton, who had written a book called Hereditary Genius. Francis Galton made the claim that genius had 3 parts: 1 part talent, 1 part passion or zeal, and 1 part hard work. And Charles Darwin's response to that was, that's a really interesting idea. I thought it was all the hard work and the passion. Maybe there is a role for talent after all. Charles Darwin himself didn't actually consider his intellect to be at all special. He thought he had a quite ordinary mind, but a very specific interest and focus, and a lot of zeal and hard work. Moving up a little closer to where we are in time, There was a graduate student at Stanford named Catherine Cox. She was the graduate student of a professor there named Louis Terman. He gave us possibly the most widely used intelligence test today, the Stanford Binet IQ test. So she was doing her graduate work in a lab where everybody studied intelligence and how to measure it, and was it possible to measure it very early in life, and could we predict genius, and so forth. And Catherine took a very different take on her own research. She wanted to know what are these other qualities that make for genius, that make for realized genius, people who are actually going to do something in the world. So she read the biographies of 300 well-known geniuses, and she isolated a few qualities which really distinguish the geniuses who made a mark on the world. One of them was the tendency not to abandon tasks for mere changeability, in her words. In other words, not being a dilettante, not being a flake, not being me from the age of 22 to 32, right? Sort of, from one award to another, from one career to another, never actually setting sights on a port that I was going to consistently work towards, right? And I think we know many, many extremely bright people who don't have the capacity to stay on task towards one goal and keep switching from one to the other. I teach at Penn. I see hundreds and thousands of kids pass through Penn's Ivy League portals, and they have this conception that essentially when they go off into the world, it will be an okay and good strategy to go to law school, and if I don't like law, I filled my pre-med requirements, so I could always go back and do medical school, and if I don't like that, there's always management consulting, the fallback of any Ivy League graduate, right? And what I want to tell them is that, history and psychology tell us that changing around a lot is actually not a good way to get anywhere. The other quality that she isolated in her work, in her sort of reading of biographies, was probably more predictable. I think many teachers and even many kids might recognize that, having perseverance in the face of adversity, setbacks, failures, that's important. And it's the combination of those things that I call grit. So it's this stamina quality, not just being passionate, but sustaining that passion for a long time. And these are items that I give in a questionnaire when I try to measure this quality in studies. Then the perseverance part as well, right? Setbacks don't disappoint me. I finish whatever I begin. I'm determined.
See, what we're finding is not necessarily the reality that shapes us, but the lens through which your brain views the world that shapes your reality. And if we can change the lens, not only can we change your happiness, we can change every single educational and business outcome at the same time. When I applied to Harvard, I applied on a dare. I didn't expect to get in, and my family had no money for college. When I got a military scholarship 2 weeks later that allowed me to go, suddenly something that wasn't even a possibility became a reality. When I went there, I assumed everyone else would see it as a privilege as well, that they'd be excited to be there. Even if you're in a classroom full of people smarter than you, you'd be happy just to be in that classroom, which is what I felt. But what I found there is while some people experienced that, when I graduated after my 4 years and then spent the next 8 years living in the dorms with the students, Harvard asked me to. Wasn't that guy. But what happened, I was an officer of Harvard to counsel students through the difficult 4 years, and what I found in my research and my teaching is that these students, no matter how happy they were with the original success of getting into the school, 2 weeks later their brains were focused not on the privilege of being there, nor on their philosophy or their physics. Their brain was focused on the competition, the workload, the hassles, the stresses, the complaints. When I first went in there, I walked into the freshman dining hall, which is where my friends from Waco, Texas, which is where I grew up, I know some of you have heard of it. When they come to visit me, they look around, they say, this freshman dining hall looks like something out of Hogwarts from the movie Harry Potter, which it does. This is Hogwarts from the movie Harry Potter, and that's Harvard. And when they see this, they say, Sean, why do you waste your time studying happiness at Harvard? Seriously, what does a Harvard student possibly have to be unhappy about? Embedded within that question is the key to understanding the science of happiness. Because what that question assumes is that our external world is predictive of our happiness levels. When in reality, if I know everything about your external world, I can only predict 10% of your long-term happiness. 90% of your long-term happiness is predicted not by the external world, but by the way your brain processes the world. And if we change it, if we change our formula for happiness and success, what we can do is change the way that we can then affect reality. What we found is that only 25% of job successes are predicted by IQ. 75% of job successes are predicted by your optimism levels, your social support, and your ability to see stress as a challenge instead of as a threat. I talked to a boarding school up in New England, probably the most prestigious boarding school, and they said, we already know that. So every year, instead of just teaching our students, we also have a wellness week, and we're so excited. Monday night, we have the world's leading expert coming in to speak about adolescent depression. Tuesday night is school violence and bullying. Wednesday night Wednesday night's eating disorders, Thursday night is illicit drug use, and Friday night we're trying to decide between risky sex or happiness. I said that's most people's Friday nights. Which I'm glad you liked, but they did not like that at all. Silence on the phone. And into the silence, I said, I'd be happy to speak at your school, but just so you know, that's not a wellness week, that's a sickness week. What you've done is you've outlined all the negative things that can happen, but not talked about the positive. The absence of disease is not health. Here's how we get to health. We need to reverse the formula for happiness and success. In the past 3 years, I've traveled to 45 different countries, working with schools and companies in the midst of an economic downturn. And what I found is that most companies and schools follow a formula for success, which is this: if I work harder, I'll be more successful. And if I'm more successful, then I'll be happier. That undergirds most of our parenting styles, our managing styles, the way that we motivate our behavior. And the problem is, it's scientifically broken and backwards for 2 reasons. First, every time your brain has a success, you just change the goalpost of what success looked like. You got good grades, now you have to get better grades. You got into a good school, now you have to get a better school. You got a good job, now you have to get a better job. You hit your sales target, we're going to change your sales target. And if happiness is on the opposite side of success, your brain never gets there. What we've done is we've pushed happiness over the cognitive horizon as a society. And that's because we think we have to be successful, then we'll be happier. But the real problem is our brains work in the opposite order. If you can raise somebody's level of positivity in the present, then their brain experiences what we now call a happiness advantage, which is your brain at positive performs significantly better than it does at negative, neutral, or stressed. Your intelligence rises, your creativity rises, your energy levels rise. In fact, what we found is that every single business outcome improves. Your brain at positive is 31% more productive than your brain at negative, neutral, or stressed. You're 37% better at sales. Doctors are 19% faster, more accurate at coming up with the correct diagnosis when positive instead of negative, neutral, or stressed, which means we can reverse the formula. If we can find a way of becoming positive in the present, then our brains work even more successfully as we're able to work harder, faster, and more intelligently. What we need to be able to do is to reverse this formula so we can start to see what our brains are actually capable of. Because dopamine, which floods into your system when you're positive, has 2 functions. Not only does it make you happier, it turns on all of the learning centers in your brain, allowing you to adapt to the world in a different way. We've found that there are ways you can train your brain to be able to become more positive. In just a 2-minute span of time, done for 21 days in a row, we can actually rewire your brain, allowing your brain to actually work more optimistically and more successfully. We've done these things in research now in every single company that I've worked with, getting them to write down 3 new things that they're grateful for 21 days in a row, 3 new things each day. And at the end of that, their brain starts to retain a pattern of scanning the world not for the negative, but for the positive first. Journaling about one positive experience you've had over the past 24 hours allows your brain to relive it. Exercise teaches your brain that your behavior matters. We find that meditation allows your brain to get over the cultural ADHD that we've been creating by trying to do multiple tasks at once, and allows our brains to focus on the task at hand. And finally, random acts of kindness or conscious acts of kindness. We get people, when they open up their inbox, to write one positive email praising or thanking somebody in their social support network. And by doing these activities and by training your brain, just like we train our bodies, what we found is we can reverse the formula for happiness and success, and in doing so, not only create ripples of positivity, but create a real revolution. Thank you very much.